Hey guys, tonight we drift into the desert dusk of northern Mexico, where dry air curls around tin roofs and ceiling fans tick like slow clocks. Picture a small, nearly invisible figure sliding across a border checkpoint, not sprinting, not sneaking, but gliding with the ease of someone who's done this a dozen times. He's not the man with gold chains or a convoy of Suburbans. No. This one carries silence like a passport. You probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes in his shoes, not because of gunfire or betrayal, but because most of us aren't built for this kind of stillness. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're watching from. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The road to Sinaloa is dry, cracked, and covered with a dust that clings to secrets. A sedan that's seen better decades hums along it, windows down, driver expressionless. No military escort, no nervous passengers. Just one man, Juan José Esparragoza Moreno, who prefers to be called El Azul, the blue one. Not for loyalty, not for coldness. Some say it was the pale tone of his eyes. Others claim it was just a nickname tossed around when he worked in the shadows of Mexican federal police. Either way, it stuck. He rolls past a border checkpoint with documents that, to most eyes, appear real. His mustache is trimmed, his clothing crisp, but not remarkable. He blends, not in the desperate way of someone hiding, but with the confidence of someone who knows nobody's really looking. This is a man who understood early that invisibility wasn't just about hiding. It was about never giving them a reason to see you. It's the mid-1980s. The drug war is reaching a new pitch. The Guadalajara Cartel is fracturing under pressure. American agents are starting to ask louder questions, and the rules of the game are changing. But Azul plays it like a man reading from a future playbook. As a younger man, Azul had worked as a federal police officer, a federale, which might explain his patience at checkpoints and his comfort around uniforms. But he wasn't the kind of officer to shake down drunks or chase car thieves. No, his specialty was listening, sitting quietly in briefing rooms, offering coffee to higher-ups, filing paperwork nobody wanted to touch. He built connections not with swagger, but with consistency. People trusted him, not because he was charming, but because he didn't ask for favors. He earned them. Now, on this desert road, he's no longer wearing a badge, but he might as well be. The same faces in uniform give him nods. Some even tip their hats. His passage is not just unimpeded. It's lubricated by years of returned favors, unnoticed bribes, and mutual understandings. You hear a lot about drug lords with private jets, tigers, and gold-plated firearms. El Azul never wanted a spotlight. He was more interested in schedules, logistics, and silence. The closest thing he had to a roar was the hum of a freezer truck carrying something it shouldn't be. Even the DEA admits they rarely saw him coming. He was the man behind the men, the architect, the strategist. And when the hammer came down on others, Azul was already in a different state, with a different name, and maybe even a different face. He could reinvent himself faster than bureaucracy could catch up. Many people still think that the reason he lasted so long in a brutal game is because he never actually played in the open. No flashy killings, no trademark violence. He operated like a consultant, quiet, efficient, gone before the news even printed the story. A fly buzzes against the window of the car. Azul ignores it. Ahead lies another checkpoint, another moment to stay invisible in plain sight. His documents are flipped through by a sleepy officer who doesn't ask questions. Why would he? This man looks like someone's retired uncle. Clean shirt, no gold, no problem. By the time he reaches the outskirts of Culiacan, the sun is a faded bruise against the sky. He doesn't head to a mansion, but to a modest house with a half-dead palm tree in front. No guards, just a neighbor's dog barking once before lying back down. Inside, a ceiling fan ticks above a clean kitchen. On the table, a small stack of envelopes, one mobile phone with the battery out, and a calendar marked with quiet appointments. Azul sits, removes his shoes, and lets out the kind of exhale that only men who have not been chased, but could be, allow themselves. This isn't the beginning of his story, but it's the beginning of when you start to see him. Not clearly, not fully, but enough to sense he's been shaping the world around you all along. A long time before the name El Azul found its way into government memos and whispered cartel conversations, he was simply Juan José, the quiet one. Not the one starting bar fights, not the one bragging about girls or cars, but the kid who always knew where the real conversation was happening. Not at the party, not on the street, but 2 doors down, behind closed blinds, between a federale and a local mayor, sharing black coffee and a deal made without ink. He grows up in Navolato, in Sinaloa, where heat shimmers off the pavement and children learn the value of silence early. It's a place where loud mouths vanish and quiet men seem to always have new shoes. By the time Juan José is in his 20s, he's wearing the dark uniform of the federal police, but not the kind that gets assigned to flashy raids. He works the edges, administration, transport, observation. He watches patterns, memorizes faces, files away who greets whom with a handshake and who avoids eye contact. What most people don't realize is that back then, the line between cartel and law enforcement wasn't a line. It was a fog. You didn't cross it. You breathed it in. Bribes weren't shocking. They were part of the structure, like rebar inside concrete. And Juan José understood that better than most. He didn't take bribes to get rich. He took them to build something more valuable, a network. When his supervisors drank too much and complained about shipments disappearing, he listened. When they mentioned names like Felix Gallardo, Caro Quintero, or the new boy from Badiraguato, Chapo, he said nothing, but he logged every word. His face, always unreadable, became a mirror. People liked talking to him because he gave nothing back. No judgment, no fear, just quiet presence. He is, at this stage, a man of no great distinction. A rank-and-file officer who drives a second-hand truck and lives in a rental unit. But quietly, he is becoming a switchboard. Every whispered deal, every crooked cop, every shift in route or power. And like any good switchboard, he never lets the signal leak. One night, he's summoned to a late dinner. Not a formal interrogation, more of an informal test. A man with soft shoes and sharp eyes sits across from him and orders a second bottle of mezcal without asking. He mentions a name Azul hadn't heard in a while. Someone connected to Guadalajara, someone with bigger ambitions. The man asks if Juan José likes his job. He doesn't answer. Instead, he refills the man's glass. That's all the answer needed. The man smiles, leaves a thick envelope, and disappears. And with that, Juan José's life as a federale begins its slow transformation. He's not quitting, yet, but he's leaning, inch by inch, into the shadows. There's an old saying in Sinaloa, the lion that doesn't roar lives the longest. Azul embodies this. While others climb fast and fall hard, he takes the stairs one at a time, never seen at crime scenes, never the name in the headline, but always there, just before, just after, just beyond reach. One night, after a particularly quiet shift, he visits his mother. She asks if he's eating well. He lies and says yes. She asks if he's safe. He pauses. Safety, after all, is relative, but she doesn't press. She offers him tamales and a small rosary. He doesn't believe in God the way she does, but he keeps it anyway. Back at work, changes are happening. Friends are getting promotions that don't match their merit. Others are disappearing, transferred, retired early, or simply erased. The air is heavier. Some names are now spoken with reverence, others not at all. But Azul survives, not by pledging loyalty to anyone, but by becoming essential to everyone. Need a name moved off a list? Need a truck rerouted quietly? Need a paper filed 3 days before the deadline? Ask Azul. Many people still think that his success came from betrayal, that he flipped on his fellow officers for a shot at the other side. But that's too simple. What he did wasn't betrayal. It was calibration. Adjusting slowly, patiently, until one day he looked around and realized he wasn't a cop in a cartel world. He was a cartel man inside a police system. He doesn't shoot. He doesn't threaten, but he arranges. He's the one who knows which cousin works at the airport, which judge has a niece with debts, which route is under surveillance and which isn't. Yet, he becomes, quite literally, the man who makes things happen without ever appearing to have done anything. By the late 1980s, he's stepping back from his badge and into the fabric of organized crime. Not with a bang, but like a thread slipping into the weave. No grand announcement, no ceremony, just the quiet closing of a door behind him and the sound of a ceiling fan spinning lazily above a man who already knows what comes next. By now, Juan José Esparragoza Moreno isn't wearing a uniform, but he still carries himself like a man who answers to rules, just different ones. Not the legal codes printed in government books, but a subtler kind. The kind written in favors, in owed silence, in who gets the last call before a shipment moves. He walks through Sinaloa like a man browsing a familiar store, not because he owns it, but because he helped stock the shelves. In the mountain villages and coastal outposts of Sinaloa, where narco corridos drift like fog and every fifth house belongs to a cousin who knows a cousin, Azul becomes something rare, a ghost with a mailing address. People know him, but no one ever quite knows how. His name never comes up in bar brawls. No shootouts are attached to his legend. But when a road needs to be cleared, or a truck needs to pass without inspection, someone says, "Let me check with Azul." And the problem quietly goes away. He doesn't dress the part of a cartel man. No snakeskin boots, no gold rings. His shoes are polished, but not flashy. His shirt always ironed. You'd mistake him for a retired banker or a particularly serious school principal. That's the point. Blend into the wallpaper. Be the kind of person no one remembers sitting next to them at lunch. It's around this time he begins to deepen his association with the Guadalajara cartel, not as a soldier or a runner, but as an intermediary, an arranger. He doesn't speak often, but when he does, people tend to stop mid-sentence and listen. His voice is calm, like water poured slowly into a glass. And his questions aren't traps, they're mirrors. Simple things like, "What's the benefit?" or "Who wins from that?" And suddenly the room changes temperature. Within the cartel, most rise through violence. El Azul rises through clarity, and he has a gift, not for dominance, but for balance. When two rival factions nearly go to war over a double-crossed shipment, it's Azul who suggests a number, a timeline, and a compromise. No threats, just a solution no one can say no to. He spends more time now in Guadalajara's outer neighborhoods, never at the main compounds, always on the edge. He eats lunch at humble cafes, never drinks heavily, and always leaves a generous tip. A couple of low-level traffickers mistake his politeness for weakness and try to strong-arm him over a border dispute. A week later, they're quietly reassigned. Not killed, not disappeared, just moved, repositioned. The message is clear. Power can be loud, but it doesn't have to be. Historical fact time. In the late 1980s, the Guadalajara Cartel is considered the grandparent of modern drug trafficking in Mexico. Led by Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, it manages everything from cannabis fields to international cocaine routes. It's big, it's bold, and, eventually, it becomes too heavy to sustain its own weight. Azul watches this evolution with the detachment of a man reading the weather report. He knows storms are coming. And unlike many of his peers, he doesn't try to build higher walls. He digs drainage. Around this time, his influence spreads. Not through violence, but through proximity. Lawyers begin calling him before big moves. Mayors start asking which names should be on hiring rosters. He never gives orders, just raises an eyebrow or changes the subject. That's usually enough. There's a story, possibly apocryphal, that a young cartel accountant once accidentally left a briefcase full of cash at Azul's house after a late meeting. 3 days later, the accountant receives the case back, untouched, along with a note. Check your math. No threat. No scolding. Just a reminder, Azul sees everything, but doesn't need to act unless something's out of place. And here's the thing. Many people still think that if Azul had been born in a different country, he'd be running an intelligence agency, or at least a consulting firm for billionaires. His gift isn't violence, it's visibility, not of himself, but of the entire board. He plays chess while others play checkers, or just throw the board across the room. Back in Sinaloa, word spreads that he's good to work with. A phrase that, in this world, means he'll help you make money, won't get you killed, and will probably remember your kid's name. That last part matters more than you'd expect. He doesn't attend weddings often, but when he does, he sits in the back and brings envelopes rather than gifts. He doesn't ask for favors in return, but when he does need something, people jump like the chair just got hot. And all of this quiet building of invisible equity, happens without so much as a puff of smoke. No arrests, no photos, not yet. Just a man in a crisp shirt walking quietly through a field that others trample. In the late evenings, he takes long walks around small plazas. Never the same town 2 nights in a row. He eats roasted corn from roadside vendors. Children wave. Shopkeepers nod. No one asks questions. Some say the secret to his longevity is that he never acts like a boss. He acts like a guest, one who never overstays his welcome, never spills red wine on the carpet, and always wipes his shoes at the door. He knows the sun's rhythm. Not metaphorically, but precisely. When it crests over the eastern hills, when the shadows lengthen just enough to allow movement, when the night gives up the secrets it tried to hide. All of this, Azul measures like a man winding a clock. His life, by now, is a rotation of careful habits, small adjustments, and watchful distance. Azul no longer wears a badge. but he carries the aura of someone still sanctioned. He doesn't move with the arrogance of untouchability. He moves with the discipline of someone who's already outlived 5 regimes and intends to outlive 5 more. His quiet steps now echo in places where police and traffickers eat from the same buffet. He's not the only one playing both sides. He's just the only one doing it so well that nobody ever sees his fork. By the early 1990s, the drug landscape in Mexico is shifting like tectonic plates. The Americans are louder, angrier, more coordinated. The DEA is pouring money and manpower into cross-border efforts. New surveillance planes are flying over Sonora, and whispers from Colombia warn of new routes under scrutiny. The Guadalajara Cartel, once a monolith, is cracking under the pressure of too much power held too tightly. Azul, true to form, doesn't get caught in the quake. He simply shifts his chair slightly away from the fault line. He begins transitioning, not just geographically, but in the way he operates. While others tighten security, hire more sicarios, build bigger bunkers, Azul downsizes. He meets fewer people, answers fewer calls, switches to shortwave radio and written messages passed by intermediaries who don't even know who they're working for. His version of power isn't expansion, it's compression. And yet, even as he pulls back, his influence multiplies. Because when others panic, they call the calmest person they know. And Azul, he's practically glacial. When shipments are seized or a route is compromised, people come to him not for vengeance, but for solutions. And he gives them, with all the flair of a man explaining where the spoons are kept. He begins forging deeper ties with both the remnants of Guadalajara and the rising players in Juarez. The Juarez Cartel, led by Amado Carrillo Fuentes, the Lord of the Skies, is booming thanks to a fleet of aircraft and a talent for air trafficking. Azul doesn't compete. He collaborates. He offers insights, suggestions, not commands. Carrillo, ever the flashy innovator, appreciates Azul's understated wisdom. There's an exchange, recorded in vague recollections, but always the same in tone, where Carrillo reportedly asks Azul why he never brags. Azul replies, "Because I'd rather survive than be admired." That might as well be his motto, and still, he maintains friendships within the federal ranks. Some old federale colleagues are now in cabinet positions. Others head police units or intelligence divisions. To most, he's still Quiet Juan, the one who never owed anyone money, who never raised his voice, who always remembered your daughter's quinceañera. These relationships are Azul's real empire. Not ranches, not plazas, but phone calls made just before the raid happens, sometimes to say, "Don't be home tonight," sometimes to say, "Send the new guy, not the captain." This is the world where loyalty is weighted in nuance, where one delayed phone call could mean a bloodbath or its complete avoidance. Azul doesn't avoid war because he's soft. He avoids it because war is loud. Loud draws eyes, and Azul's whole life is a masterclass in remaining undetected. Historical fact time. Following the collapse of the Guadalajara Cartel, Mexico's narco world broke into factions, Tijuana, Juarez, and Sinaloa among the most powerful. Many of the key figures had once dined together in Guadalajara's ranches. Now, they pointed guns at each other across state lines. Azul had the unique advantage of being one of the few who could still visit every table without getting shot. How? Because he never owned the whole pie. He just handled the knives. Many people still think that Azul's power came from cowardice, that he refused to lead so he wouldn't be held accountable. But maybe he simply understood that in this world, The man who avoids titles avoids targets. At a small gathering in Durango, low-key, mostly older associates, someone once asked him why he never took control of a cartel himself. He stirred his tea, smiled, and said, "Because the boss always dies first." No one laughed, but everyone nodded. There's a late-night meeting in a hotel with flickering electricity where Azul reviews a new map of proposed trafficking corridors. He moves a single pen across the map and says, "Not there. The mayor's brother got promoted." No one had known that. No one had even heard the promotion was official. But 3 days later, it is. The room is quiet. No applause, just the slow acknowledgement that once again, Azul is ahead of them all. And so he drifts, not aimlessly, but deliberately, from safe house to safe house, from meeting to meeting. A man with no fixed location and a permanent presence. If anyone tries to pin him down, they find echoes, handshakes remembered, but footprints already blown away by the wind. He's not invisible, just very, very hard to frame. The Guadalajara cartel may be splintering, but its lessons linger in every corner of the trade, like fingerprints on a polished glass. Azul doesn't mourn the fall. He saw it coming. He always does. When leaders get loud, when the money grows faster than the trust, when egos start hiring their own photographers, that's when things begin to crumble. So he pivots, again, quietly. This time he drifts toward Juarez. Amado Carrillo Fuentes is ascendant now, and his ambition is carved across the skies. Aerial trafficking is the new gold standard. Planes stuffed with white bricks, zipping across air corridors like executive flights. It's bold, it's fast, it's risky, but it works, especially when you have the right men smoothing the runway. Men like Azul. Their alliance isn't formal. No contracts, no initiation rituals. Azul doesn't swear loyalty to any one plaza. He's loyal to functionality. Amado respects that. He doesn't need another soldier. He needs someone who can read a government document and predict which judge will be reassigned by fall. Azul provides that. He provides more. Within the Juarez cartel, Azul becomes a kind of silent board member. Never photographed, rarely spoken of. But his suggestions flow through the system like clean oil through an old engine. He advises on hiring, on diplomatic quietness with local law enforcement, on where not to store large cash reserves. His counsel is boring and brilliant. He even proposes something radical for the time. Pay the families of dead couriers, not out of guilt, out of logic. A reputation for loyalty breeds better workers. It's basic business. That's how Azul sees this. Less as war, more as logistics management. Many people still think that Azul was the soft one, that his hands were clean because he didn't pull triggers. But make no mistake, routes he designed fed the machine. People died from what he enabled. His silence wasn't innocence. It was insulation. Still, it's hard to argue with the results. Under Azul's watchful influence, Juarez hums like a well-maintained refrigerator. It doesn't roar, it doesn't leak, and nobody wants to unplug it. In fact, even the DEA begins to refer to Juarez as the more stable structure compared to the chaos breaking out in Tijuana and Sinaloa. He establishes routines that few even notice. He encourages fewer convoys, less armor, more legal facades. If you're buying a plane, put it in the name of a ranch that sells air-conditioned livestock trailers. If you're moving cash, split it between 3 funeral homes and let them invoice each other monthly. It's all so boring that no one thinks to look there. Historical fact time. By the mid-1990s, Juarez had become one of the most profitable trafficking hubs in the world, pulling in billions annually. And while Amado was the face of that empire, the jet-fueled kingpin, many insiders whisper that Azul was its skeleton, the frame holding it all up, the one that didn't creak, even when pressure mounted. At one point, Azul is invited to a more formal gathering, a cartel wedding where everyone wears cologne and even the waiters are armed. He shows up late, stays 20 minutes, brings no date, and leaves behind a single envelope. Inside, no cash, no weapon, just a notarized copy of a property deed in Michoacan. A subtle gesture, a reminder. If things go wrong in Juarez, there's always another house to hide in. Later that night, as guests are still dancing and bottles clink on rented tables, the groom receives a phone call. A checkpoint on a key route has been lifted. No one knows why. No one knows how. But the route is clear. Some say it was the envelope. Others say Azul made a call. Both may be true, neither can be proven. Azul never sticks around long. His reputation grows in proportion to his absence. New recruits speak of him like a fable. He once changed a route without anyone knowing and saved the entire shipment. He speaks 4 languages and never repeats himself. He doesn't eat meat on Sundays. Each myth adds a layer, like lacquer on old wood, and maybe that's his intention. He starts minimizing even further. Doesn't drive. Doesn't carry phones. Writes on scrap paper, then burns it in tin cans behind rural homes. Communicates via third parties who don't know each other. If he needs to send a message, it might come folded inside a tortilla or on the back of a lottery ticket, or whispered through a priest during confession. He walks through border towns dressed like an insurance agent. Wears glasses he doesn't need. Visits optometrists just to hear what's happening in small clinics. He knows which local politician has kidney issues, which customs officer is sending his son to college in Arizona. He never uses this information for leverage. Not directly, but he files it. And when the time comes, he makes suggestions, never threats. Do you remember the envelope he left at the wedding? Months later, that same property in Michoacan becomes a safe house for a Juarez lieutenant on the run. Coincidence? Or was Azul just thinking 3 steps ahead? As always, when Guadalajara shatters and Juarez soars, most players pick sides. They scramble for turf, fight over routes, build bunkers, hire men. Azul doesn't. He studies, watches, waits, because he knows something they don't. The next phase won't belong to the loudest. It'll belong to the most adaptable. So while bullets fly in Baja and bribes balloon in Tamaulipas, Azul begins laying threads for a new idea. Something novel. Something built not on fear, but on structure. A federation. Not a cartel, but a syndicate. A partnership of plazas, each managed independently but bound by shared logistics and rules. It's less a criminal gang and more, well, a cooperative with teeth. And thus begins the slow, careful formation of what we now call the Sinaloa Cartel. Not the modern, messy Sinaloa of endless shootouts and narco corridos, but its earliest seed, a loose alliance of traffickers from different regions who agree to work together instead of setting each other's ranches on fire. Azul isn't the face. He never is. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman brings the charisma. Ismael El Mayo Zambada offers veteran respect, but it's Azul who whispers the terms, sets the schedule, and reminds everyone that peace is cheaper than funerals. He attends no summit, no meeting in a jungle hideout. Instead, he moves between homes like a migrating ghost, offering assurances, nudging egos, resolving grudges from the old Guadalajara days. He becomes something no one had seen before in the narco world, a moderator. There's a story, maybe half true, that during one early negotiation, 2 lieutenants nearly come to blows over shipment percentages. Azul asks for a moment, steps out, comes back with 2 cups of coffee, places them on the table, says nothing, waits. One man drinks first, the other laughs. Deal done. No violence, just warmth and caffeine. Many people still think that Chapo built Sinaloa alone. But without Azul, it wouldn't have been a federation. It would have been another dictatorship destined to implode. Azul's role was infrastructure, not just trucks and airstrips, but trust and spreadsheets, if not literally, then mentally. Historical fact time. By the early 2000s, the Sinaloa Cartel had established itself as the most sophisticated trafficking organization in the Western Hemisphere. Its success was due in part to brute force, but far more to its layered, decentralized design. A design that bore all the fingerprints of Azul's strategic mind. He insists on certain rules. Routes are shared. Profits are divided. Violence is minimized. No flashy revenge. No personal wars. You kill because it's necessary, not because you're bored or slighted. And if you can solve something over soup, solve it over soup. This isn't kindness, it's preservation. Azul also pushes for diversification. He encourages safe investments, construction companies, avocado farms, used car dealerships, places that generate receipts, places that pay taxes. He believes in building shadow economies, not just shadow armies. In his world, a clean invoice is more powerful than a grenade. You wouldn't know it from the press clippings, but his influence spreads into politics, business, and law enforcement. Not through force, but through favors. He's the reason why some routes are always 1 week ahead of surveillance, why certain customs officials get promoted quietly after a favorable inspection report. He never handles the product. He never touches a gun, but he moves things, the way wind moves through a canyon. You don't see it, but you feel its work, and still, no photos, no recordings, just one blurry headshot from the 80s, often recycled in media reports with caveats like believed to be or allegedly shown. He's become a kind of mythical creature, a narco Bigfoot, leaving only faint impressions in sand. By this point, younger traffickers begin referring to him in reverent tones. Not boss, but El Señor. When disputes arise, lieutenants ask each other, "Has Azul weighed in?" If the answer is yes, the matter is closed. He develops a habit of using intermediaries who never see his face twice. A driver might work for him for 6 months and never know what he looks like. A lawyer might pass messages without ever getting a return call. He's the architect of his own opacity. Do you remember the old Federal badge? He still has it. Not as nostalgia, but as leverage. Once, when a local commander starts sniffing too close to a stash house, Azul sends someone to deliver the badge, wrapped in velvet. No note, no threat. The next day, the commander transfers out. No questions asked. Even within the cartel, few know where Azul sleeps. He's rumored to rotate between 5 houses, each owned under different names, each tended by unrelated families who think he's an uncle or a cousin recovering from surgery. And through all of this, he rarely speaks more than necessary. No rants, no monologues, just short statements, pregnant with consequence, like "move the meeting to Mazatlan," or "that mayor will be gone in 8 months," or simply, "not yet." Each phrase ripples through the system like coordinates punched into a satellite. The brilliance of Azul lies not in what he builds, but in what he avoids. He doesn't claim plazas, doesn't scrawl his name into blood-soaked legend. He doesn't need to. His influence moves not like a wave, but like gravity, always present, rarely named. At this point in time, as the 2000s loom closer, many cartel figures are obsessed with spectacle. Narco submarines, gold-plated rifles, YouTube videos of masked gunmen holding bazookas in jungle clearings. Power becomes performative. It's all shouting, no listening. And Azul listens more than ever. His meetings grow shorter, more infrequent, and more decisive. He now conducts entire strategy sessions with a nod, or with 3 silent men sitting in a room, interpreting the placement of documents on a table. You get the sense that if Azul ever did say something wrong, the world might pause out of habit. One such meeting takes place in a modest house in Nayarit. It's early evening, no bodyguards, no armored vehicles, just 2 chairs and a ceiling fan struggling against the heat. The man across from him is young, ambitious, and too loud. He lays out a plan to take over a key distribution hub in Chiapas. Azul listens, tilts his head, and asks, "Does your mother know you're risking your life for this?" The room goes quiet. The man leaves half an hour later. The plan is dropped. Chiapas remains untouched. Sometimes leadership means making men rethink their childhood, but Azul's growing network isn't all theory. It's meticulous architecture. He retools the way shipments are moved, no longer relying on one big route, but dozens of small ones, like blood vessels rather than arteries. If one is cut, the others keep flowing. He divides risk, not just geographically, but legally. Shell companies own shell companies. Each truck is leased from a different source. Each warehouse built by a subcontractor who doesn't know who signed the real contract. Even the safe houses are decorated like Airbnb rentals, just cozy enough to be forgotten. And while everyone else scrambles to bribe officials, Azul does something more interesting. He bribes their assistants, the people who read their schedules, screen their calls, fetch their dry cleaning. It's cheaper, more effective, and invisible. Many people still think that Azul was simply lucky to never be caught. But luck has nothing to do with carrying 3 sets of identification, 5 sets of clothes, and 7 exit strategies. Every time you sit down for coffee, one mainstream journalist once called him the gray man in the world's most colorful war. It's oddly accurate. In a trade built on flair and blood, Azul walks through shadows with the detachment of a systems analyst. Historical fact time. Around the early 2000s, the Mexican and U.S. governments increased joint operations under the banner of Plan Merida, aiming to dismantle the major cartels. Surveillance improves, wiretaps multiply, arrests spike, but somehow, Azul keeps dodging detection, like a weather pattern slipping past the radar. In a memo dated 2004, an internal DEA analyst reportedly refers to him as non-interceptable. That's not code. That's resignation. Meanwhile, inside Sinaloa, Azul keeps smoothing friction. When El Chapo grows bolder, making risky moves and flashy escapes, Azul offers course corrections. When El Mayo seeks new routes but risks too much overlap, Azul intervenes with maps, not warnings. He draws a red circle around a port and says, "Only one of you can touch this. Choose." And they do. He becomes the cartel's unacknowledged judiciary, not a judge, but an arbiter. If 2 factions disagree on shipment splits, they don't fight. They wait for Azul to blink in one direction, to mention a city, to not mention another. Do you remember the time he handed back a briefcase untouched, telling the accountant to check your math? That accountant now manages offshore routing for millions. And he still sends Azul a Christmas card. No return address, of course. Azul also begins withdrawing even more from visible cartel gatherings. No ranches, no family parties. He sends gifts, a vintage watch, a quietly deeded property, a batch of Cuban cigars delivered with no note. Each one says, "I'm watching, I care, and I'm still 2 steps ahead." He surrounds himself with older operatives, men past their prime, but who remember how to shut up. They don't carry guns, they carry stories. Azul listens to them not for nostalgia, but for intelligence. Which cousin now runs which plaza? Which mayor's niece has a wedding coming up? Which rival is building a 3rd airstrip in Jalisco? All of it gets logged. Mentally, if not on paper, he never forgets. That's part of his legend. Not just the plans, but the birthdays, the allergies, the people who once lied. Once. The debts still unpaid. The favors quietly returned. There's a subtle irony. While others expand their empires outward, more land, more weapons, more men, Azul's empire becomes inward, tighter, quieter, more efficient. You won't see it on the news. But if you know what to look for, you'll find his fingerprints in the strangest places. A customs shift in Matamoros that makes no logistical sense. A late-night warehouse fire in Sonora that destroys exactly 1 set of records. A municipal clerk who suddenly resigns after a quiet lunch break. None of these are crimes exactly, but they all feel arranged. The federales split. The plazas fracture. Names rise and fall like tide charts scrawled in blood. But Azul, he's still there, somewhere. You can't pin him down, but you can feel him, like the barely noticeable hum of electricity behind a wall. As the Sinaloa Federation expands, absorbing roots, brokers, and rivals into a sprawling, decentralized empire, Azul becomes even more vital, not for control, but for balance. He doesn't command, he curates. And one of his greatest talents is knowing when to disappear and when to simply drift closer. In 2006, everything shifts again. A new Mexican president launches a frontal assault on the cartels, La Guerra contra el Narcotráfico. Soldiers flood the streets. Helicopters thrum above towns that once only knew the sound of roosters and trucks. Entire cities become checkpoints. Old alliances fray. But Azul doesn't panic. He had seen this coming. He doesn't just disappear. He pre-disappears. Several months before the first military units deploy, Azul is already liquidating minor assets, shifting personnel, and establishing buffer layers. Lawyers who speak for middlemen, who speak for drivers who've never met him. The smoke rises across Mexico, but none of it comes from his chimney. And here's where he becomes something more than a trafficker. He becomes a stabilizer. While other bosses resort to full-scale war, Tijuana's Arellano Felix throwing grenades into nightclubs, La Familia Michoacana broadcasting public executions like press conferences, Azul argues for restraint. He's the quiet voice on encrypted radios reminding people that dead mayors invite investigations. That revenge isn't scalable. That sometimes the smartest move is no move at all. Many people still think he was too old school to adapt to the digital era. That his paper-only ways would be his downfall. But ironically, his analog systems now protect him. The government can tap phones and track text messages. They can't trace notes passed by a child in a school uniform to a bakery worker who thinks he's delivering a grocery list. Historical fact. By 2008, the Mexican government had identified the big three of the Sinaloa Cartel, El Chapo, El Mayo, and El Azul. But while the first two appeared regularly on wanted posters, Azul remained a ghost. No new photos, no reliable sightings. He was on every watch list, and simultaneously, no one could watch him. There's one particular incident, a major bust in Durango. Several tons of cocaine seized, multiple arrests, a cache of weapons that looked like it belonged to a small army. Authorities are sure they've hit a command post, but they find something else. A room filled with ledgers, paper records, all coded, neat, handwritten in block letters. No names, just patterns. It's a system so precise, it feels surgical. It doesn't scream Chapo or Mayo. It whispers Azul. Later analysis shows the books cross-reference shipping data with rainfall records, power outages, and even soccer match outcomes. The idea? Hide real intelligence inside noise. Mix operational codes with sports stats. It's either genius or madness, or both. The authorities never publicly attribute it to him. But internally, agents start referring to that ledger system as the Azul Matrix. Meanwhile, Azul continues doing what he does best, making everyone else think they're in charge. He lets Chapo play the flamboyant escape artist, lets Mayo hold the elder statesman role. He doesn't want the spotlight, he just wants the system to run. He quietly pushes for alliances with Colombian contacts known for discretion. Not the flashy Medellin types, but logistics experts from Cali. He prefers moving meth precursors through ports rather than smuggling bricks across desert. Less weight, less heat, higher yield. And when the government begins freezing assets, Azul's assets are untouchable. Not because they're hidden, but because they're boring. Registered in the names of shell corporations that sell poultry feed, or textile dyes, or HVAC parts in rural Oaxaca. He invests not in gold-plated villas, but in warehouses no one thinks to photograph. Do you remember that old property deed he gifted at the cartel wedding? Years later, it's sold, cleanly, to a Canadian development firm. No red flags, no drama, just a smooth transaction worth millions. And guess who's quietly listed as a consulting agent on the Canadian side? Azul never shows up to sign. The paperwork arrives via courier, typed, sealed, notarized. One government clerk later remarks that it was the most well-prepared transaction file I've ever seen. At one point, a young trafficker, eager, arrogant, asks why no one ever sees Azul. He's a ghost, the kid jokes. Maybe he's not real at all. An older man replies, he's real. He just moves like fog. Try to grab it and you'll get a handful of air. There's another whispered story. Never verified, but oft repeated. A mid-level federal agent receives an envelope at his home. Inside, a vintage photograph, slightly worn, showing his own father shaking hands with a man who looks suspiciously like a younger Azul. No threat, just a photo. A gentle reminder that history is not always on your side, and that some men never really leave the frame. By now, even law enforcement who chase him full-time have developed a kind of reluctant awe. He's not the kind of guy who runs, one agent says in an internal memo. He's the kind of guy who was never in the room. To understand how Azul survives while others fall, you have to accept one uncomfortable truth. He is the only man in the game who doesn't want to win. Not in the traditional sense. He doesn't crave territory, doesn't lust for glory, doesn't measure success by body count or headlines. He measures it by duration, by how long he can keep moving, unnoticed, essential, and absolutely untraceable. By 2010, the Mexican government is in a frenzy. El Chapo is becoming a pop culture villain. Videos circulate. Songs are written, raids are televised, and still, Azul isn't mentioned in any corrido. No rap verses, no Instagram tributes, just silence. Not because he isn't feared, but because he's too valuable to mythologize. Sinaloa's federation has by now grown into a continent-wide syndicate. There are routes from Ecuador to Tijuana, from Guatemala to Los Angeles. And in the midst of it all, Azul is said to be quietly running logistics like a ghost CEO. His operations span air, sea, and land, but never leave his fingerprints. You'd have better luck finding the Wind's mailing address. One DEA agent reportedly calls him the man who manages risk like a Swiss banker. Another, less generously, dubs him the cartel's HR department. Not for irony, Azul is known for mediating disputes, replacing hot-headed plaza leaders, and even organizing quiet retirements for men who know too much but caused too little damage. There's a quiet case in Oaxaca, a mid-level operator skimming too much off the top. In most organizations, this would mean a bullet, maybe a ditch. But under Azul's influence, the man is quietly removed, sent to operate a bakery in Campeche. Still on the payroll, still breathing, but no longer a liability. Azul's logic is simple. Blood draws heat, and heat interrupts business. Many people still think that he's simply non-violent by principle. But it's more than that. He's non-disruptive. Violence is unpredictable. Violence requires attention. Azul prefers decisions made in rooms with fans whirring and phones unplugged. And when violence does occur, when it becomes inevitable, he ensures it happens fast, clean, and with no witnesses. One body, not 12. One car crash, not a shootout. His fingerprints might not be on the trigger, but the room in which the decision was made, that's usually his design, historical fact. While the government boasts high-profile arrests, El Chapo in 2014, La Barbie, El Vicentillo, Azul remains untouched. No sightings, no fresh intel, not even whispers from flipped witnesses. One U.S. intelligence report notes, subject has no digital presence, no intercepted communications, suspected in advisory capacity, but confirmation unverified. Translation? They don't even know if he's alive. And yet, within cartel circles, his influence continues. Lieutenants begin invoking him in strategy talks. Azul wouldn't approve, one says when a younger capo suggests a high-profile kidnapping. The comment ends the plan. Just like that. But Azul isn't just myth. He's movement. He continues adapting. As technology evolves, he evolves around it. While younger traffickers use encrypted apps and burner phones, Azul goes back to basics. He writes on napkins, he folds maps, he sends handwritten notes inside hollowed-out batteries. Paranoia? Maybe, but it keeps him out of every sting operation ever recorded. At one point, a top lawyer connected to the Sinaloa network gets arrested. Under pressure, he offers to name names. He lists bosses, drivers, suppliers, even mentions El Mayo's cousin. But when asked about Azul, the room falls silent. He says, "There's no benefit in saying his name. No one knows it. Not really." That silence becomes a kind of shield. Do you remember that time Azul intervened in a dispute between two factions over a port route? He never met with either party, just sent two identical briefcases, each containing half a solution. Neither man got everything, but both walked away, convinced they had won. That's negotiation Azul style. Compromise designed so precisely, it feels like a personal victory. Meanwhile, rumors swirl. That he's retired, that he's terminally ill, that he fled to Venezuela under a false passport and grows papayas in a quiet valley. that he's living in Portugal under a fake name and still calls in to meetings using coded poetry lines. None of it's proven. All of it's possible. And then there's the airport story. A small airstrip in Sinaloa gets a surprise inspection. The guards find nothing. Clean manifests. Perfect paperwork. As they leave, one of them notices a pen resting on a desk. Ordinary, blue, cheap, but taped to its underside is a folded piece of paper, coordinates, 4 sets of numbers, and a date. The inspector pockets it, unsure. A week later, a rival cartel convoy is ambushed at those exact coordinates by no one knows who. The message is clear. Even when you think you're safe, Azul may already be in the room you just left. He communicates through absence, reassures through timing. His version of power isn't built on fear, it's built on credibility. Because at the end of the day, if Azul tells you to move your operation, you move it. Not because you're scared, but because he's never been wrong. Azul's power doesn't pulse, it hums. It's not the kind of presence that walks into a room and makes people stand. It's the kind that you only notice after it's gone, and things stop working. Phones go unanswered. Trucks sit idle. And suddenly, the silence feels heavier than it should. By now, most of the major players in the Sinaloa network are either in hiding or in handcuffs. Chapo, who once tunneled out of prison with cinematic flair, is recaptured. The government parades the arrest like a trophy. Mayo remains a ghost, albeit one whose name appears in headlines, narco ballads, and DEA reports. But Azul, still no new photo, no voice clip, no confirmed sighting. Just a presence, just results, just problems solved before anyone realized they existed. In the quiet shadows left by larger-than-life arrests, he becomes more important than ever. He's not just the man people turn to for advice. He's now the standard by which other decisions are measured. Lieutenants ask, what would Azul do? Even if they've never met him. Even if they're not sure he's still alive. And yet, the system he helped build keeps functioning. Routes continue shifting smoothly in response to crackdowns. Warehouses change hands quietly, never triggering red flags. Bank accounts close a week before sanctions land. Everything just keeps moving, not with bravado, with math. Azul's gift, if you can call it that, is predictive clarity. He's the kind of person who can look at a shipping manifest and know which customs officer will call in sick that week, who can see the appointment of a new mayor and intuit that the local port will be unusable for 3 months. He doesn't need drones or algorithms. He has pattern memory and a Rolodex of whispers. One well-placed rumor says that a DEA informant once tried to map Azul's operations. After weeks of notes and cross-referencing, the agent drew a single conclusion. It's not a tree, it's a root system. There's no trunk, just connections under the surface, sprawling in every direction, each one feeding the others. Azul's role isn't managerial, it's nutritional. He nourishes the machine, making sure every part receives what it needs. Money here, silence there, movement elsewhere. When a shipment is delayed, he doesn't yell. He reroutes it through a flour export company 2 states over. No confrontation, just recalibration. Historical fact. When analysts later pieced together how the Sinaloa Cartel maintained international operations despite multi-front crackdowns, they found a pattern of fallback mechanisms, contingency within contingency. Warehouses already leased under false names, pilots pre-cleared by shell companies, product repackaged under alternate codes. Azul, though never directly named, is seen in the shadow of each pivot. There's a warehouse in Veracruz, ordinary looking. holds nothing but packaged motor oil and spare tires. But beneath it is a trapdoor leading to a cool, tiled room. Inside, 2 desks, 3 locked cabinets, and an old rotary phone. No guards, no cameras, just dust and discipline. It's used, maybe once a year, but it always works. Only Azul could orchestrate something like that. Not for daily use, but for worst-case continuity. Many people still think that Azul's brilliance was his calm, that his stillness made him untouchable. But the truth is deeper. His power came from his utility. He made himself necessary, not just to one person, but to everyone. He wasn't loved. He wasn't feared. He was depended upon. And dependence is a kind of leash you never see until you try to move without it. Do you remember the customs officer who kept getting promoted without explanation? Turns out his brother worked at a salt processing plant, quietly owned by a paper company, quietly owned by a law firm, quietly run by a woman Azul had once helped get through university. Coincidence? Or simply repayment long overdue? The man thinks in years, not weeks. Meanwhile, within the cartel, his legend only deepens. Not through songs or tales, but through rules. Azul protocols, they call them. Unwritten commandments. Never use the same route more than twice. If 2 lieutenants argue, let them. If 3 argue, step in. If a shipment is late, assume it's seized. But never assume the driver talked. No revenge without revenue. They're not sacred texts, but they work. And they get repeated in hushed conversations, as though Azul himself might be listening through the drywall. There's another rumor, buried deep in the collective lore. A high-level Colombian broker, known for his extravagance, once insulted Azul during a deal, called him obsolete, too careful, too slow. Days later, the broker's primary route was quietly exposed to a U.S. task force, not traced back to Azul, not even noticed at first. But the message was there. Precaution isn't weakness. It's patience, weaponized. Azul doesn't retaliate, he recalculates. At one safe house, his only furniture is a small wooden desk and a radio tuned constantly to AM stations. Not for news, for patterns. He listens for shifts in tone, words repeated too often, names dropped too casually. While others obsess over surveillance drones, Azul tunes in like it's 1953. When asked once what his biggest fear was, a driver claims Azul said, "Confidence." The driver laughed. Azul didn't. In a world built on chaos, Azul's greatest act of defiance is consistency. While younger bosses ride convoys with tinted windows and armored SUVs, Azul slips into town in an old sedan, one hubcap missing, one brake light faded. No fanfare, just presence. You could pass him on a dusty street in Sonora and never know you'd just brushed shoulders with the man who silently orchestrates the most efficient drug empire on the continent. By now, he's less a person than a principal. Entire branches of the organization follow his guidelines without ever hearing his voice. His rules spread like folklore, passed from cell to cell. A field operative in Baja says, Azul wouldn't approve, and that's enough to cancel a hit. A warehouse manager in Culiacan notices too much activity and pulls the plug, not on orders, but because Azul always said quiet feeds longevity. He becomes the ghost behind good decisions, and yet, somehow, law enforcement never stops looking. Every few months, a rumor surfaces. He's been spotted in Panama, buying groceries in Tapachula, praying in a small church in Querétaro. Each time, agents swarm, neighbors are questioned, and then, nothing. No fingerprints, no security footage. Just the faint scent of cologne and coffee beans. In 2012, a government sweep hit Sinaloa hard. Raids tear through farms, stash houses, small-town city halls. dozens of arrests, tons of product seized. Still, Azul evades capture, not by luck, not by force, but by displacement. Like a whisper passed in a crowded room, he's always just beyond the ear. One official, frustrated after yet another failed operation, mutters in a press conference, "We're chasing a fog." That becomes the headline. Many people still think that Azul isn't even alive anymore, that the cartel merely invokes his name as a kind of managerial ghost story to keep people in line. But others swear they've seen the man. Older now, moving slower, but still sharp, still watching. And it's not impossible, because every now and then, something happens that feels too coordinated. A customs schedule shifts 3 hours ahead, just before a loaded cargo ship docks. A mid-level official resigns without explanation days before a corruption probe begins. An airstrip, long abandoned, is suddenly repaved and operational for one night only. These aren't accidents. These are Azul's fingerprints, soft, deliberate, temporary, historical fact. In 2013, the U.S. Treasury Department officially designates Azul as a major foreign narcotics trafficker, placing him under the Kingpin Act. Sanctions are applied, assets are frozen, press releases circulate. But there's a strange hollowness to it all, because no one can say where he is, what he looks like now, or even who's running his day-to-day affairs. In fact, there's an internal joke among DEA analysts. We sanctioned a ghost. Meanwhile, inside the organization, his silence becomes scripture. When someone makes a brash move, like threatening a journalist or torching a rival's nightclub, it's not just discouraged, it's corrected. Azul's network doesn't discipline with bullets, it disciplines with exclusion. Once you've ignored the quiet way, you don't get invited back to the table. There's a man in Guadalajara who once served as a courier for Azul. Just documents, nothing flashy. When asked what the experience was like, he said, "Like working for the air. It carried you, but you never held it." Azul's tools remain old school. Burn phones with 2 numbers max, paper maps with roads no longer on Google, handwritten ledgers hidden inside books on veterinary science. His safe houses aren't high-tech bunkers. They're unassuming apartments with good neighbors, weak cell signal, and 2 exits. One such apartment, discovered accidentally during a fire inspection, is pristine. No weapons, no cash, just a bed, a desk, and a folder labeled simply, Julio, pending. Inside, nothing illegal. Just a list of potential warehouse hires with little notations. Talks too much? Wife suspicious? Clean cousin in Matamoros. That's Azul, not detonation's decisions. And while the drug world continues to evolve, synthetics, crypto transactions, satellite relays, Azul still prefers analog systems. Not because he can't change, but because he doesn't need to. His core principle hasn't failed him. Complexity attracts attention. Elegance disappears. He eats dinner alone. He leaves no digital trail. His messages are delivered in the margins of invoices or with a tap on a driver's shoulder at a gas station. He's never once used a laptop, and yet, do you remember the envelope at the cartel wedding all those years ago? The property that became a safe house, then a clean sale. Rumor has it, part of the funds from that transaction were funneled legally into a rural scholarship program. Anonymous donors, no trace. But 2 of the recipients now work in logistics companies tied, ever so faintly, to supply routes once operated by Sinaloa. Coincidence? Not likely. Azul doesn't build empires with bricks. He plants trees. Deep roots, slow growth, and always in the shade. At some point, power stops being loud. It stops calling meetings, stops giving orders. It just exists, like weather or gravity. That's the level Azul reaches. He no longer instructs, he implies. He doesn't enforce, he sets a tone. And somehow, that's more effective than any command. By the time we reach the mid-2010s, the drug war has shifted into an arms race of optics. Narco tanks, Twitter accounts, influencers flashing stacks of bills beside gold pistols. Cartels are no longer just criminal organizations, they're media brands. But Azul, true to form, refuses the spotlight. Not out of humility, out of strategy. He moves like a man who knows attention is a tax. His role in the Sinaloa Cartel is now largely invisible, but not diminished. If anything, he's more dangerous in this phase, more deeply rooted. He doesn't command lieutenants. He selects advisors, quiet men, unassuming accountants, men with calloused hands and too much memory. They form a kind of council, unofficial and unseen, that keeps operations humming beneath the chaos. There's no official title, no ceremony, just a knock, a conversation, a shared cup of coffee at a roadside stall, and you're in, or you're not. Azul's version of leadership is frictionless. If he wants something to happen, it happens. Not by decree, but by design. He adjusts pressure in just the right places, moves a few contacts, rotates a few accounts, reassigns a driver to a different city, and suddenly the shipment arrives. The official looks the other way. The story fades before it's printed. Many people still think that by this point, Azul had faded into irrelevance, that the digital age left him behind. But the opposite is true. As the game got louder, he became more vital. He became the whisper between the explosions. One senior intelligence analyst, off the record, once said, "If you removed Chapo, someone else would rise. Same with Mayo. But if you remove Azul, the whole structure leans inward. Azul's absence would create a vacuum, not in leadership, but in balance. He's the internal gyroscope, the quiet metric keeping the system from tearing itself apart." Do you remember the customs official in Veracruz who kept receiving anonymous tip-offs just in time to clear a route? He eventually resigned, citing gut instinct fatigue. When asked what that meant, he just said, "I don't know. I just felt guided." That's Azul, a system of soft nudges. Even his finances reflect this philosophy. His accounts don't swell. They rotate. Shell companies that appear to break even year after year. Farms that produce just enough to justify their existence. Export firms with low-margin contracts that still somehow pay salaries on time. If you follow the money, you find nothing. Or worse, you find something too boring to pursue. Historical fact. In 2014, Mexican authorities announced that Azul had died of a heart attack. Quietly. No raid, no shootout, no drama. Just expired. But almost immediately, doubt bloomed. No body. No confirmed witnesses. No verifiable documentation. Just an announcement and a murmur. Even within government circles, skepticism was palpable. One high-ranking official reportedly said, "If Azul is dead, then death is also unlisted." The cartel issued no formal statement. Sinaloa continued running like a well-oiled, ghost-manned factory. Routes stayed open. Bribes were paid on time. Violence remained measured. If this was a death, it was the most polite one ever staged. Many people still think that the announcement was planted. A retirement plan, wrapped in a death certificate. After all, what better way to become invisible than to be declared gone? But then, in 2015, a peculiar thing happened. A newly formed logistics firm in Durango quietly acquired 3 small warehouses, each positioned perfectly along Sinaloa's secondary distribution grid. The firm? Registered to a holding company out of the Cayman Islands, with historical ties to an attorney once photographed standing near Azul in 1987. Nothing provable, but enough to stir whispers. Another ripple. A ranch in Zacatecas, previously dormant, began receiving regular deliveries. Feed, fencing supplies, veterinary gear. No livestock, just infrastructure. When local police investigated, they found nothing illegal. But one officer noted the floor in the back barn seemed new, too new. Azul's trail is like that. Not a line, but a shimmer. You don't follow it. You just notice where things feel oddly functional. His relationships, too, evolve. He no longer speaks directly to anyone under the age of 40. He delegates downward through 2 or 3 levels, always using men old enough to remember the original rules, those baked into Guadalajara's soil when the cartel system still had a spine. He trusts the past more than the present, and when the new generation starts getting too flashy, posting on social media, filming themselves with assault rifles and pet tigers, Azul doesn't punish them. He sidelines them. Routes dry up. Payments delay. Opportunities vanish. They call it the quiet curtain. No one tells you you're out. You just stop getting calls. It's not a punishment. It's a pause. An invitation to rethink. He believes in correction over destruction, because destruction draws cameras. Correction draws reflection. You can almost hear him say it. Live loud, die early. Live quiet, die invisible. Or perhaps not die at all. In a world addicted to escalation, Azul remains committed to erosion, slow, steady, and unnoticed until the foundation's gone. That's always been his strategy. Not to confront power, but to outlast it. Not to fight chaos, but to let it collapse under its own weight. And the system somehow still works. By 2016, the Sinaloa Cartel has become both legend and labyrinth. Its leaders are hunted. Its rivals are fracturing. New challengers rise. The CJNG, splinter factions, digital age kingpins who move fentanyl and fire memes. The game is changing fast. But the ones playing loudest aren't necessarily playing best, because even now, beneath the noise, trucks still move, routes still function, warehouses still open and close like clockwork. And behind that, the architecture feels familiar, clean, precise, like someone's still pulling strings, even if the puppets have changed. And here's the thing. No one ever definitively confirms Azul is dead. There's no grave, no autopsy, no family statement, no leaked photos. Just that announcement, timed curiously close to a major military operation. Some believe it was a misdirection. Others believe it was a negotiation. Whispers swirl. Azul had brokered his own exit. Given the government just enough, just one key name, just one address, to buy silence. In exchange, he gets the only thing more valuable than freedom, non-existence. Many people still think that retirement is a fantasy in the drug world, that the only way out is a coffin. But Azul never played by those rules. He didn't build an empire around his name. He built it to run without his name. So when the time came to walk away, the machine didn't stutter. It purred. There's a man now living in the highlands of Chile, reportedly running a trout hatchery. Never married. Uses cash. Walks with a slight limp. His neighbors call him Don Rafael. They say he's polite, quiet, very good with numbers. Occasionally receives letters with no return address, just a blue dot on the envelope flap. Coincidence? Maybe. But then again, Azul never cared about belief, only systems. Do you remember that trapdoor warehouse in Veracruz? It was recently sold. to a private courier service expanding its cold storage division. Completely legal. The new owner? A former employee of a shipping company with vague historical ties to Michoacan, and a former baker from Durango listed as a silent investor. Once again, the pieces shift quietly, precisely. No violence, no scandal, just the sound of papers being stamped, permits being approved, and another door quietly swinging open. Azul's methods have become doctrine. New lieutenants, those who never met him, are taught restraint, the way others are taught how to clean a weapon. They're told, if a deal feels too good, it's probably a setup. If it feels boring, it's probably smart. Azul lives in their choices, even if they don't know it. Historical fact. When authorities reviewed cartel communications during the 2015 to 2017 period, they noticed something strange. Messages that mentioned El Chapo or Mayo often contained code names or slang. But messages referencing a third figure used silence, delays, blank lines, or just the phrase, "It's been considered." Considered by who? That's the kind of legacy Azul leaves. One where acknowledgement happens in pauses. One of the last real sightings of Azul is said to occur at a remote rural church in Zacatecas. A local woman reports seeing an older gentleman, well-dressed, respectful, sitting in the back row during a baptism. He doesn't speak to anyone, doesn't join the celebration, just nods at the priest, lights a candle, and leaves a donation envelope in the wooden box. Inside it, 10,000 pesos, and a handwritten note that simply reads, "For the silence," and maybe that's all he ever wanted in the end. Not absolution, not recognition, but the permission to vanish without noise. In the cartel world, bosses become legends by dying spectacularly. Azul becomes a ghost by refusing to die at all. His legacy isn't a tombstone, it's a structure, a design, still functioning, still evolving. They say now that when a plaza starts operating efficiently, without drama, without bloodshed, it's running on Azul time, a nod to his tempo, his patience, his refusal to hurry ruin. Even rivals admit quietly that his way works, that if they'd followed his path, they might not be in exile or prison or buried beneath unmarked soil. There's a plaque in a small cafe in Sinaloa. It doesn't name him. It simply reads, "The quiet ones stay longest." Some say he placed it there himself. Others say it appeared one morning, and the owner just kept it because it felt true. That's Azul, the man who never needed to be remembered, because everything still works in his absence. By the time most people in the game hit their peak, Azul had already vanished into legacy. His name stops appearing on reports. No fresh intelligence, no indictments, just echoes. Yet the structure remains, smoother than before, quieter, more disciplined, as if the machine had been wound one last time before its maker disappeared into the dusk. Within Sinaloa, the younger generation now walks a narrow line, flashing cash while looking over their shoulders. They crave recognition, but dread attention. They inherit systems they barely understand, and while some chase fame, others quietly study the paths Azul laid, routes defined not by violence, but by efficiency. One such operator, new to the scene, asks an older courier how to handle a turf overlap. The answer? Draw 2 maps, now burn both. Go talk to his uncle. That's Azul logic. Reroute the fire before it burns. Cartel politics, in Azul's absence, grow increasingly unstable. Where once disputes were resolved with calm calls and shuffled assets, they now escalate. Shootings in daylight, politicians caught between rival bids, retaliations that spill into hospitals and schools. The new players don't remember the old rules, or they ignore them. But even now, when the chaos begins to peak, someone always steps in with a whisper. We should run this the Azul way. That phrase is no longer a tactic. It's a culture. The Azul way, it means fewer calls, more notes. It means leaving a package instead of making a demand, waiting 2 weeks instead of reacting in 2 minutes. It means understanding that violence isn't control. It's proof of lost control. There's a school in Baja now, funded by a non-profit that never lists its donors. It has computers, reliable electricity, and its own water filtration. Locals say an older gentleman once visited during construction, offered a suggestion on where the windows should face, and left. Never gave his name. But the blue check on the invoice's corner? That felt like a signature. Azul's hand no longer signs documents, but his choices ripple through other men's actions, like vibrations from a bell long silenced. Historical fact: the decline of centralized cartel leadership post-2015 coincided with the rise of more chaotic, decentralized cells, more violent, less organized. But one faction, operating along the Durango-Mazatlan corridor, consistently maintained lower casualty rates, fewer internal disputes, and higher profit stability. No one ever officially linked it to Azul. But analysts noted the behavior: shared routes, minimal flash, disciplined logistics. It didn't look like a cartel. It looked like management. And who teaches management in a storm? Only someone who already survived one. Many people still think that Azul's model is outdated, that in today's high-speed, crypto-fueled trafficking economy, his slow-burn strategy has no place. But those same critics are often the first to fall, betrayed by their own noise, caught in the floodlights of their own ambition. There's a shipping container port where inspectors note something odd, a pattern. Containers from a certain zone always pass review, not because they're bribes. No, the paperwork is flawless, too flawless. Dates always aligned, barcodes clean, safety seals never once compromised. When a retired official is asked about it, he just chuckles. Those containers are pre-cleared. Someone pre-cleared them 5 years ago. Azul may be gone, but his preparation lives on. In cartel meetings now, his name is used sparingly, less like a person, more like a clause. Azul wouldn't have done it this way. Azul would have waited a week. It's not nostalgia, it's correction. A reminder that the old ways, while slower, kept everyone breathing. And in government circles, Azul remains a puzzle unsolved. A what if? One official still keeps a file marked JJE Moreno, status, probable deceased. But the word probable is underlined 3 times. Do you remember the airstrip in Sinaloa that suddenly reopened for one night? A month later, the surrounding land is sold to a conservation group. Now it's a wildlife preserve. But locals report hearing a twin-engine plane take off that night. One takeoff. No landing. Did he leave? Was he even there? No one knows. Some say he's living in silence under another name, in a place where his past is just rumor, and the present is a garden that grows slowly, away from roads. Others believe he died years ago, but trained enough people to keep the silence moving, like monks tending a machine whose purpose they revere but do not question. There's a final rumor, perhaps the most poetic. A young law student in Mexico City receives a scholarship from a fund she's never heard of. It covers everything: tuition, books, a modest apartment. She never asks where it came from. But years later, after she becomes a judge and rules in a particularly balanced way on a sensitive land seizure case, an envelope arrives at her office. Inside, a single photo. A man in his 70s, back turned, seated beneath a jacaranda tree in bloom. No note, just a blue paperclip on the corner. She keeps it in a drawer. Says she doesn't know why. Maybe that's Azul's final move, not to be remembered. Just recognized by those who value silence not as absence, but as form. There's a strange kind of comfort in the systems Azul left behind, not because they are kind, but because they are predictable. In a world where betrayal often comes wrapped in smiles and disaster arrives dressed in confidence, his structures, cold, quiet, precise, offer stability, not morality, just rhythm. Within the remnants of the Sinaloa Federation, even as new factions claim territory and younger bosses rename plazas like they're rebranding cereal boxes, there's an undercurrent of discipline that hasn't eroded. You hear it in the timing of deliveries, in the restraint during conflicts, in the way certain messages still travel through untraceable channels. Notes taped to bananas, codes passed through receipts at fuel stations, strange pauses during otherwise normal conversations. That's his fingerprint. Even his enemies respected it. Rivals in the Gulf Cartel once reportedly stopped an offensive after intercepting a signal. Not a threat, not a bribe, just a shipment of blankets and antibiotics delivered to a neutral village. No demands, just relief. That was an Azul move. Quiet influence through unexpected compassion. A lever no one could retaliate against. Many people still think that his success was because of who he knew. But truly, it was because of what he refused to become. He didn't chase headlines. He didn't hunger for loyalty. He didn't confuse attention with safety. He chose to be useful. And in this line of work, usefulness outlives everything else. Even now, when older operators hear the name Azul, they don't smile. They nod, quietly, as if acknowledging a rule still in effect, even after the lawmaker is gone. Do you remember that school in Baja? Its graduates now work in freight companies, law firms, customs offices. They move papers, not product. But the funding? Still comes on time. No donor names. Just quarterly payments from an account labeled GS Consultores. No office. No phone number. Just results. Historical fact. In 2020, during a regional audit of nonprofit activity in northern Mexico, GS Consultores was flagged for review. The case was closed within weeks, not due to pressure, due to perfection. The filings were flawless. The auditors called it a model of procedural cleanliness. One even asked to use it as a template for future reviews. Now, in the final stretch of this long, quiet journey, the legacy of Azul doesn't reside in his myth. It resides in the infrastructure that never collapsed, the warehouses that never burned, the names that never made headlines because they never needed to, and in the places where he might have once stood, a shaded church courtyard, a border cafe, the back seat of a very ordinary taxi, you feel something not quite gone, a trace, a residual logic, because that's what he really left behind, a way of thinking. You don't light the fuse if the room is already dark. You don't answer quickly if silence still holds weight. You don't win by being seen. You win by still being there. So, if you ever hear someone speak of a shipment that arrived just in time, or a corrupt official who suddenly retired instead of taking a bribe, or a threat that never turned into violence because someone made a phone call at the right moment, you're not hearing about luck. You're hearing about echoes, about footprints too careful to leave dust. Azul may be gone, He may be somewhere far from all of this, hands in his pockets, looking at a distant coastline with nothing but time and tea and old thoughts. Or maybe he's still here, the phantom string in 1,000 marionette movements, still reminding the world that quiet isn't weakness, it's architecture. And now we rest. The noise is behind us. The road is clear. The dust has settled. The fan turns slowly overhead. No footsteps, no sirens, just night, just rhythm, just a name you never really heard, still holding the whole thing up. The stories they tell about Azul grow quieter with time, but never fewer. If anything, as the world races forward with louder kings and messier crowns, the myth of the quiet man becomes more necessary, not just to the underworld, but to those watching from above. Investigators, analysts, even rival organizations, they all still reference him like a North Star, even if no one can say exactly where he ended up. In a government training seminar for financial crimes, an instructor once used a diagram. Dozens of shell companies, all linked by trade records, invoices, and joint ownership of obscure logistics firms. The whole web looked chaotic, until you saw the symmetry. A single, untraceable intelligence pulsing beneath. At the end of the session, the instructor tapped the screen and simply said, "This is what it looks like when Azul's hand is on the wheel." Even in absence, he offers a blueprint. The younger generation tries to imitate his calm, but they always miss something. They confuse silence with indecision, or strategy with delay. Azul never hesitated. He simply didn't rush. That's a difference you feel, not see. One mid-level capo in Sonora attempts to copy the Azul model. He ditches the social media posts, stops wearing flashy watches, instructs his men to avoid public scenes. For a while, it works. Profits stabilize, no arrests. But then he starts cutting corners. Less vetting on drivers, faster shipments, quicker deals. Within 8 months, his plaza implodes. Informants everywhere, a warehouse raided, a cousin arrested. The copy failed because it missed the principle. Azul didn't remove noise for peace. He removed it for clarity. Many people still think they can replicate Azul by following his methods. But what they don't realize is that the most important part of his power was his intent. He didn't build to impress. He built to endure. He wasn't performing efficiency. He was efficient, because he believed chaos was wasteful, not exciting. There's a story, almost too poetic to be true, that one of his last remaining messages was passed not through paper or whispers, but through absence. A planned meeting in Guadalajara between 2 rival factions was suddenly canceled. No explanation. But when they returned to their respective cities, both found the same object delivered to their homes. A folded white cloth napkin. Nothing else. Some say it meant peace. Some say it meant stand down. Others think it was just Azul's way of saying, "Don't make a mess I'll have to clean up." And it worked. The conflict dissolved before it began. Historical fact: between 2017 and 2019, several small corridors in Durango and Zacatecas operated without a single recorded incident. No murders, no seizures, no reported bribes. To law enforcement, it seemed almost empty. But logistics firms in the area recorded a quiet spike in transport volume. Paper goods, canned milk, dry cement, all low profile, all heavily insured. The routes were being used, just carefully. The phrase Azul Strip began circulating internally, a nod to his surgical logistics. Within the ranks of the cartel, his absence becomes a kind of challenge. New players attempt to stake claim to the unspoken vacuum, They host bigger parties, buy louder toys. But the people who truly understand power don't look at the noise. They look at the flow, and the flow, it still bends where Azul once stood. There's an accountant in Sinaloa who still runs projections on revenue patterns tied to pre-2015 Azul structures. He calls them legacy lines. They're slower, more cautious, and slightly less profitable. But they have one remarkable trait. They never collapse. He once pitched an expansion to a new investor. The younger man said, "This isn't aggressive enough." The accountant replied, "No, it's still here." That's better. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is build something that doesn't break. Do you remember the safe house in Nayarit with the bare desk and the old radio? After it was abandoned, a local took it over. Lives there now. Turns out the place is unusually well insulated. Cool in the summer, warm in the winter. He doesn't know who built it, just calls it the quiet house. Says he sleeps better there than anywhere he's ever lived. There's something deeply Azul about that, because even in the dust, the design holds. Even in whispers, the logic stays sharp. Even after the architect vanishes, the rooms still lock smoothly, and the windows still face the sunrise. As the years move forward, Azul becomes less of a man and more of a phenomenon. Not the supernatural kind, but the kind you notice only by what doesn't happen. When trucks pass undisturbed, when elections unfold without scandal, when a deal goes exactly as planned and no one can quite explain why, it has his scent, even if his hands are nowhere near it. At this stage, even the suggestion of his name creates gravity. No one claims to speak for him, because doing so would imply permission that no one wants to falsify. His authority lingers not through inheritance, but through architecture. A design so well built it continues functioning long after the engineer steps away from the blueprint. There's an emerging trafficker in Jalisco, just 27, eager and precise. He follows all the new rules: encrypted communication, crypto laundering, minimal exposure. But he still slips. His convoy is caught, his men scatter, and his safe house is raided. What failed? He tried to move product on a route Azul once marked as long dead, not because of enforcement, but because decades earlier, Azul noticed that local ranchers were changing, that too many trucks drew attention, that the weight of the route no longer matched its silence. So he rerouted. Quietly. Forever. Azul wasn't just avoiding detection. He was editing the future. Many people still think that criminal genius means outsmarting the system. But Azul understood that the real trick was building a system smarter than yourself, and then letting it run, like a good watch, or a well-timed rainfall. Historical fact. Mexican law enforcement once compiled a list of 25 individuals considered most essential to the continued operation of the Sinaloa network. 23 were arrested or killed within 3 years. 1 defected. The last, never confirmed, never seen. But the report listed him anyway, with a blank photo and a code name. El Silencioso. No real name, just a placeholder. And most investigators believed they were referencing Azul. And then there are the letters. No one knows where they come from. They arrive by courier or mail, or left behind in meeting rooms, addressed to no one in particular, typed, clean, each one offering a simple piece of guidance, not threats, not instructions, just advice. Change ports by Q4. Avoid cross-border transfers during holidays. The lieutenant in Aguascalientes is too emotional. They don't bear a signature, just a tiny blue mark, sometimes a dot, sometimes a line, sometimes nothing but the faint outline of a fingerprint smudged with ink. Are they really from Azul, No one knows. But every single time someone has ignored one, they've regretted it. Do you remember the scholarship fund in Baja that supported low-income law students? It's now expanded, quietly, without press. It operates in 6 Mexican states. Still no listed founder. But every year, without fail, tuition gets paid, books get shipped, and each recipient, when they graduate, receives a simple leather-bound journal. No message inside. Just a navy blue ribbon tucked between the pages. The design never changes. A young journalist in Hermosillo investigates the fund. She finds nothing. No addresses, no directors, no office. Just a mailbox number and perfect accounting. When she finally asks a retired judge about it, he smiles and says, "That's not a story. That's a thank you letter to the future." Azul's presence is like that now. Written between lines, stored in pauses. Not in the big headlines, but in what doesn't make the paper. In the meeting that goes smoothly. The investigation that stalls. The violent act that someone, somewhere, decided wasn't necessary anymore. He's not a shadow on the wall. He's the wall itself. He's the reason some routes stay open when others collapse. The reason some men live long enough to retire. The reason entire cities seem strangely calm during cartel civil wars. And when someone new enters the trade, ambitious, brash, armed with all the latest tech, someone always pulls them aside and tells a version of the story. Not the whole thing, just the shape of it. Enough to say, there was a man once. He never raised his voice, but the world moved around him like it was reading his breath, because in this world, everyone fears the loudest man in the room. But the one they trust, the one they wait to hear from, that's the man who says nothing at all, and still gets the final word. Some legacies announce themselves. Towers built, fortunes flaunted, photos staged with arms around mayors, mistresses, or both. But Azul's legacy isn't sculpted in bronze or echoed in song. It's more like a pressure in the atmosphere, felt, not seen. The kind of weight that makes people lower their voice, even when they're sure he isn't listening. By now, the Sinaloa Cartel has fractured, rebranded, and metastasized. Chapo is in a U.S. supermax prison. Mayo, still unseen, whispers through couriers and cousins. Splinter groups fight over who gets which port, who controls what terrain. It's all loud, urgent, and blood-soaked, but in the background, a handful of old routes, quiet, boring ones, keep running. No fireworks, just consistency. And when investigators follow them, they find clean paperwork, modest invoices, trucks that show up when they're supposed to, and drivers who never carry weapons. These aren't the flashy corridors, they're the old ones. The ones Azul mapped decades ago, through back roads and between egos. Some say those routes are his grave markers, not stone, not soil, but movement, a logistics eulogy running 60 kilometers per hour with nothing in the rear view. There's a woman in Sinaloa now, an accountant, no known criminal ties, keeps a modest apartment. She does taxes for agricultural suppliers, but her ledgers are flawless, her timing impeccable, and her client list oddly stable. When asked where she learned her method, she smiles faintly and says, "Someone once gave me a template." She never says who. That's the thing about Azul's legacy. It wasn't designed to impress. It was designed to replicate, quietly, safely, endlessly. Many people still think that power needs a name, that if no one salutes you, you've failed. But Azul proved that real power is anonymous influence, that if you shape the rules, you don't need to enforce them. Others will do that for you, because the rules work. Do you remember that case file labeled El Silencioso? The one with no photo, no birth date, no confirmed location? It's still open. Year after year, it's renewed with a blank cover page and a note that reads, "Pending verification." One investigator once tried to close it. He was told by a superior, "We don't close gravity," and so it stays open. There's another story. A prison in Tamaulipas runs into logistical trouble. Food shortages, budget errors, administrative chaos. Then one day, a new supplier steps in. No bidding war, no delays. Shipments arrive on time. Prices are fair. The food improves. Inmates stop rioting. No one really asks who fixed it. But someone finds a sealed envelope in the warden's office drawer. Inside, a printed spreadsheet, a routing plan, and a sticky note with a tiny blue line drawn across it. No words, just the mark. Azul doesn't write messages anymore. He just balances spreadsheets that shouldn't exist, even among enemies. There's a reluctant reverence. A rival from Michoacan once said in an intercepted call, "I don't fear Sinaloa, I fear their ghost." It wasn't metaphor, it was strategy, because even their chaos often feels checked. Like someone is still holding the reins behind a curtain, but it's not just fear Azul leaves behind. It's a way of thinking. He taught lieutenants to ask better questions. Not, "Can we move this faster?" but, "What happens 3 steps after that?" Not, "Who do we pay off?" but, "What do they need before they ask?" That kind of thinking doesn't make legends. It makes systems. There's a vineyard now in Querétaro. Quiet, beautiful, produces exactly enough to sustain operations. Nothing flashy. But its export routes line up suspiciously well with several former Sinaloa corridors. The owner? A quiet man who used to deliver fuel in Sinaloa's back roads. Never rose through the ranks. But he understood timing. Understood restraint. People say he still has a leather-bound journal tucked in his office drawer. Inside, only one thing is written. You don't have to be remembered to be effective. Azul may be gone, or maybe not, but his ideas, his fingerprints, still touch every piece of this world. From the way shipments are staggered, to the silence that follows a well-placed favor, to the fear that keeps a hothead from pulling a trigger too early. And in that sense, he didn't disappear. He just made himself unnecessary. The highest form of mastery. As time wears on, Azul's name becomes something like the wind that passes through a closing door, present for only a second, but deeply felt. The new generation of traffickers often misunderstands him. They see his absence as weakness, his lack of showmanship as antiquated. They make moves with fireworks, video leaks, convoys, drone footage of executions. But while they're playing for likes, Azul's roads still carry weight. One of his old associates, now long retired, puts it best over a bowl of caldo at a roadside diner. They chase noise like it's worth something. But El Azul, he knew silence was the most expensive real estate in the business. In 2021, a joint operation between U.S. and Mexican forces targets the last remaining old school cells in northern Sinaloa. Multiple arrests, seizures, trucks lined up and exposed. But one region, nestled between dusty mountains and a dry riverbed, remains untouched. Not because it's invisible, because it's irrelevant to the cartel war unfolding above it. And yet, shipments keep passing through that corridor. Quiet ones, labeled as medical supplies, or mining equipment, or dairy. Nothing flashy, but all timed to perfection, like the last tick of a grandfather clock. Azul's clock. Many people still think he only survived because he never challenged the throne. But that's wrong. He built the throne, then walked away from it. His challenge wasn't to the cartel, it was to the idea that visibility equals power. And it worked. Historical fact. In the years following the alleged death of Azul, Sinaloa maintained unmatched consistency in international drug flow. While leadership was publicly fragmented and rival cartels imploded under internal war, Sinaloa's routes ran at 87% stability year over year, not because of command, but because of architecture. A leaked report from a U.S. intelligence contractor put it simply: this isn't decentralization, it's distributed trust. There's a warehouse in Puebla now, nondescript, surrounded by orange groves. On the inside, it's a marvel. Inventories balanced to the kilo. Shipments cross-referenced with lunar cycles and weather reports. No armed guards, just 5 quiet employees, all over 50. They joke sometimes about working for the ghost. No one ever clarifies, but the pay is always on time. The bonus is modest but reliable. And when asked what would happen if one of them tried to steal from the place, an old man with thick glasses just says, he'd know. You don't question who he is, because some systems are still loyal to their author, even when they haven't seen him in years. A customs officer in Panama intercepts a mislabeled shipment. Nothing illegal, just awkward. Too perfect. He delays it. Within 48 hours, he's reassigned to a new station. More remote, more peaceful, better pay. No paperwork filed, no protest raised. He receives a small package on his last day, a leather wallet, handcrafted, with a card inside. On it, a single line: "Thank you for not overreacting." He keeps it in his desk drawer. He never talks about it, but he never stops wondering who really sent it. Do you remember the woman accountant from Sinaloa? The one who kept her apartment modest and her ledgers flawless? She's now been quietly offered a position with a logistics firm in Portugal. No public listing, just a sealed offer letter sent by courier. Her friends ask if she'll take it. She simply nods and says, "I think he needs me there now." Even now he's recruiting, or perhaps preserving, because Azul never believed in empire. He believed in continuity. He didn't want to be remembered. He wanted the system to function without him. And somehow, that's exactly what's happened. There's no war fought in his name. No statue raised. No plaza named El Azul. But every time a route goes untouched, every time a bribe is offered before the threat, every time a situation diffuses before it sparks, that's him, or at least the shape of him, an echo of a man who saw that longevity beats glory, that the longest shadow is cast by the man standing just outside the light. In his final ledger, if it exists, there are probably no names, no totals, just questions. Is it running? Is it calm? Is it worth the risk? And if the answers were ever yes, yes and no, he'd sleep well. Or more likely, he'd already be gone by then. At a certain point, Azul stops being a reference point for operations and starts becoming a kind of code of conduct. Among old hands in the game, drivers who've clocked 1,000 routes, accountants who've seen more cash than most banks, his name isn't spoken with awe but with alignment, like a compass. Quiet, constant, in a crumbling world of hot tempers and flashbulb violence, the Azul method becomes more valuable than ever. Not because it promises safety, but because it offers stability. When cartels implode and lieutenants flip and entire routes collapse under too much weight, the ones who survive aren't the best armed. They're the ones still following the old man's invisible script. At a small logistics hub in Chiapas, one shift manager, formerly a smuggler, now fully legit, insists on checking every shipment by hand. Not out of paranoia, out of rhythm. He always said, "Trust the plan, not the packaging." A younger co-worker rolls his eyes. The older man shrugs. 2 months later, the shipment that kid approved gets flagged and seized. The old man's shipments? Still running. Many people still think that Azul's lessons were meant only for crime. But if you look closely, they resemble something older, something monastic. Discipline, minimalism, observation. The idea that fewer words are more potent, that the best way to control chaos is to never let it enter the room. There's a cafe in Durango where former operatives gather, now gray-haired, quieter, slower. They don't talk about gunfights. They talk about truck weights, fertilizer prices, which judge just moved to a new district. Every now and then, someone mentions him. Not directly. Just a phrase. This feels like his tempo again. Historical fact. Following the cartel fractures of the late 2010s, the only region to maintain uninterrupted product flow without major seizures or bloodshed was a corridor running through the highlands of Sinaloa. No one claimed ownership. No flashy leaders, just smooth movement. Authorities referred to it as Sector Zero. No arrests were made there. No one ever confessed to running it. But it matched the operational blueprint Azul had been linked to since the 90s. Do you remember the vineyard in Querétaro? It's expanded, still modest, still under the radar, but now it hosts an annual retreat, on paper, a gathering of import-export professionals. In practice, a quiet reunion of minds shaped by Azul's methods. They don't plan hits or trade routes. They review insurance trends, border policy, fuel costs. They don't even call themselves anything. Just associates of continuity. And in one corner of the vineyard's main house, behind a panel in a bookshelf, is a narrow room. A desk, a chair, a wall map with push pins, each pin corresponding to a route that hasn't been used in a decade, but is ready just in case. In the center of the map, no name, just a faded blue ink dot. That's all that's left. And it's more than enough. Even outside of Mexico, his echoes reach. A European freight handler in Antwerp reportedly rejects a major customs inspection, refuses to greenlight the team without full documentation. When asked why he was so careful, he says, "Because our sponsor taught us. If the math doesn't click, the door doesn't open." No one knows who he means, but the audit comes up clean. Elsewhere, a private security firm operating out of South America traces a supply line that seems impervious to disruption. It runs from Bogota to the Pacific in under 28 hours. No military heat, no leaks, just timed exits, greased gates, and rotating operators. When asked who designed it, the answer is vague. An older plan, still works. No need to fix it. That's Azul again. He doesn't haunt people, he calibrates them. His influence is never the loudest in the room, but it's always the one still echoing after the room empties. There's even a government analyst, semi-retired, who keeps a photo of a clouded mountain range on his office wall. No men, no buildings, just fog and elevation. When visitors ask what it is, he says, "That's the only place I think he'd go." The truth is, Azul could be anywhere, or nowhere, but that's no longer the question. Whether he's alive or dead, in hiding or long gone, he succeeded at something few in his world ever do. He exited clean. His system runs without him. His name carries weight even when unspoken. His principles outlive their author, because true legacy isn't carved into monuments. It's coded into decisions. And when a new crisis comes, a shipment intercepted, a rival encroaching, a line beginning to fray, someone always pauses and asks, "What would Azul do?" And just asking the question often solves the problem. By now, Azul isn't a presence. He's a philosophy, a method passed from one careful operator to the next. not through orders or rituals, but through example. You'll never find a handbook, but those who work in the shadows will tell you there are rules, and they all sound like him. Never repeat a move that worked. Never escalate when you can shift. Never let your solution be loud. The thing about systems like his is that they don't need to shout to spread. They're viral in a different way, quietly replicated by people who want longevity more than dominance. And so, you see traces of him in places you'd least expect. A customs checkpoint in Guatemala that suddenly changes hours. A storage facility in Texas where 3 unrelated companies happen to rent space. Yet all their deliveries arrive within minutes of one another. A transfer company in Spain that's never made the news, never lost a shipment, and never had a police raid. All these places claim they've never heard of him, and maybe they haven't, but they're operating in his silhouette. There's a new trend in law enforcement circles now. Junior analysts comb through old Azul-linked routes, trying to reverse engineer his strategy. They look for patterns, shipment frequencies, city elections, weather forecasts, even school schedules. They call them blue paths. Patterns so elegantly designed, they almost feel invisible. One report even calls him the architect of flow, not just for drugs, but for how people move, how bribes are timed, how enforcement is predicted and evaded. Not violently, but with beautiful inconvenience. Azul didn't stop systems. He rerouted them, like a detour sign painted on fog. Do you remember the woman judge who once received a photo of a man beneath a jacaranda tree? She's now on a special task force investigating cartel financing. But she's known, quietly, as someone who knows how to de-escalate. She asks better questions. She moves slower than her peers. And somehow, she never makes enemies. No one connects her caution to that envelope. But she keeps it still, in her drawer, beneath old case files. Many people still think that if Azul were still alive, he'd be irrelevant by now. That the world's too fast, too digitized, too brutal for someone like him to matter. But that's misunderstanding his genius. Azul never tried to outpace time. He anticipated it. Where others built for the moment, he built for the moments after. He knew this era was coming. He just made sure he didn't have to be around for it. Historical fact. In the final years before Chapo's last arrest, multiple shipments were redirected last minute due to quiet advisories from unknown sources. One DEA field report noted a shadow actor still active in route coordination, someone with insider access but no visibility. They never named him, but they didn't need to, because even government agents understood. Some actors exit the stage but keep writing the script, and that's where Azul lives now. There's a legal advisor in Panama who, when asked about the safest way to structure a high-risk investment network, simply says, use the Azul format. And when asked what that is, he smiles and says, patience, layers, zero celebration. Elsewhere, in a dry coastal town in Peru, a retired mechanic owns a bakery with odd traffic. Locals whisper that he's no mechanic, but they don't ask questions. The bread is good, the price is fair, and deliveries always arrive before sunrise. No receipt, no delay, no discussion. When one customer asks how he learned such timing, he wipes flour from his hands and says, I used to run fuel for someone who didn't like waste. That's all he says, but it's enough. Because no matter how much time passes, the efficiency of his silence still teaches. New generations may never say his name, but they'll move the way he taught, discreetly, deliberately, without chasing the kind of power that needs defending. His final triumph isn't that he escaped, it's that he made escape unnecessary, because when the work is clean, and the structure is solid, and the pieces know their place, You don't need to be there anymore. You just need to trust the inertia. So today, somewhere, a shipment moves through customs. A judge makes a decision that prevents a war. A document arrives one day early and prevents a mistake that never makes the news. And maybe, just maybe, someone lights a candle in a quiet church. Not because they're mourning, but because they're grateful for the lesson, for the timing, for the calm. By now, the name Azul has become something people invoke with the same tone they use for wind patterns or tides. It's not about whether he's real anymore. It's about the way things move when he's remembered. In a cartel culture obsessed with identity, nicknames, tattoos, branded weapons, dramatic deaths, Azul's anonymity becomes almost spiritual. His story is a meditation on restraint in a business built on overreach. He never needed to prove himself because he knew something few others did. Proof invites pursuit. So while others built kingdoms of sand and banners, he built a system designed to survive its own silence. Some say he's still alive, living somewhere beneath the skin of another name. A new passport, a different gate, a cup of coffee in a different time zone. But more than that, people say they can feel when a room's been shaped by him. A decision made with no ego. A shipment that reroutes before the risk appears. A war that doesn't happen. These are the marks of someone who understood pressure, like a sculptor understands stone. There's a customs office in Central America now, where junior agents are told, unofficially, to pay close attention to shipments that are too clean, not fraudulent, flawless, no dust, no noise. Almost like someone went out of their way to avoid suspicion. They call them Azul packages. Because even now, his philosophy shows up not in the fingerprints left behind, but in the effort made to not leave any. Many people still think that Azul's calm came from detachment, that he didn't feel fear or loyalty or tension. But that's backwards. He felt it all. He just filtered it through design. For him, caution was not cowardice. It was art. And that art is now canon. There's a port in Mazatlan where one foreman still uses a dock schedule built on a template Azul proposed in the 90s. It's simple, efficient, boring, but it's kept product moving for years, legal and otherwise. And every time someone tries to modernize it, something breaks. So they go back to the original. "We don't fix what isn't leaking," the foreman says. Then adds, "He wouldn't like that." Historical fact. Azul was one of the few major cartel figures never linked to a public massacre, never recorded giving an order to kill, and never caught on a single surveillance wire. Not once. Not even by accident. Agencies with billion-dollar budgets and satellite access couldn't confirm his voice, let alone his face, because he didn't disappear when watched. He was never visible to begin with, and even now, investigators keep the file open. Why? Not because they expect a sudden reappearance, but because the system he left behind hasn't stopped functioning. It keeps humming like a refrigerated truck on idle. Clean titles, on-time invoices, bribes issued months in advance of need. There's a philosophy textbook at a university in Mexico City. A professor, retired from government, teaches a course on criminal networks. In the middle of the semester, he dedicates a week to what he calls the absence method. The lecture isn't about Azul by name, but it might as well be. It's about the power of the unconfirmed, the unclaimed, the unspoken. One student, curious, asks, "So did he win?" The professor shrugs. "Depends on what you think the game was." Azul never cared for empire. He didn't want a throne or a title or a myth. What he built was durability. a structure so elegant that it could lose its builder and still outlive a dozen louder dynasties. And that's exactly what it's doing. Do you remember the man who ran the trout hatchery in Chile? He's gone now, passed away quietly in his sleep. No obituary, no autopsy. Just a small service paid for by a trust account no one can trace. The only item of note found in his possession? A receipt from a bookstore dated 25 years earlier. For one item, a ledger. The total cost marked in blue ink. No name. He didn't leave a note, but his freezer was full, his debts cleared, and his staff paid through the next fiscal year. Even in death, he managed the exit, because that's what Azul taught everyone who listened. Disappearance is not an ending, it's an arrangement, and the best ones never fall apart. As the world spins faster, algorithms rising, loyalties crumbling, the very idea of permanence evaporating, there's something almost sacred about Azul's continued influence. Not in a holy sense, but in how enduring it feels. In an empire built on flash and blood, his ghost remains the only thing that hasn't been overthrown, arrested, or rebranded. He was never a warlord, never a kingpin. He was something rarer. He was a constant. Even now, when people describe particularly smooth transactions, almost impossibly clean logistics, or an operation that feels too mature for the men behind it, they'll say, "That feels like an old Azul line." They mean it as a compliment, but also as a warning, because where his fingerprints are, there's order. And where there's order, someone's already anticipated your next 10 moves. There's a case file in Washington, thick, bound in blue plastic. It contains every trace, every whisper, every maybe linked to Azul. On the cover, someone once scribbled in pen, "How do you prosecute design?" The answer, it seems, is, you don't. Because Azul never built anything illegal. He built things that allowed others to act illegally with more stability, less violence, fewer mistakes. That's why people keep returning to his systems. Not because they're nostalgic, but because they still work. Many people still think they can outgrow his lessons. That modern tech has made his style obsolete. But then a blockchain gets hacked. A flash shipment gets seized. A flashy new boss gets caught posting photos with tagged locations. And the survivors, they go back to the old methods. Printed ledgers, no names, clean routes, people who've never seen each other's faces. The Azul method. There's a young logistics apprentice in Colombia, trained in export compliance. She's never met a trafficker, but her supervisor insists she color code her ledger notes and memorize shipping cycles by heart. "We work old school," he tells her, "so we don't have to hide anything, only improve it." She asks him once if he used to work on the other side. He smiles faintly. "No, but I learned from someone who did. Somewhere, in a village in northern Mexico, a man tends a plot of land behind a rusted gate. No guards, just a good dog, a small greenhouse, and a habit of walking the perimeter exactly once at 6 a.m. and once again at dusk. The neighbors don't know much. He's quiet, pays in cash, doesn't drink. But once a month, a package arrives, plain, wrapped in brown paper. Always contains the same thing, a single envelope, a printed report, port activity, legislative updates, enforcement reshuffles, and a blank note card folded once. No message, just presence. Still watching, still balancing, still breathing somewhere between now and then. Historical fact. During an audit of customs databases in 2023, a terminal in Oaxaca was flagged for never having recorded a single bribe-related complaint in nearly 15 years. The inspection found nothing, but the reviewer noted that the site's logistics procedures were almost too perfect, resembling systems designed outside standard policy. No one traced it back to Azul. but everyone familiar with him smiled at the phrasing. Do you remember the Vineyard Retreat in Querétaro? They now host discreet mentorships, one-on-one coaching for low-profile logistics professionals. The attendees are hand-picked, no websites, no photos. The only requirement? A letter of referral from someone who uses only first names. Each session begins with a toast, not to wealth, not to power, but to clean exits. That's Azul's truest legacy, not empire, but escape. He understood the loudest men die with the loudest regrets. But if you move right, if you design right, if you walk the line between relevance and removal just carefully enough, you don't have to vanish in tragedy. You can just walk away and leave something that hums behind you, like the low, perfect tick of a watch that never needed winding. By now, the silence around Azul isn't just absence, it's strategy incarnate. The cartel world he once helped shape has changed dramatically. The names in the news are louder, the shootouts more public, the alliances thinner. Yet somehow, every time a network implodes, someone in the room whispers a phrase that's half prayer, half regret. Azul would have never let it get this messy. It's not nostalgia, it's recognition. Because while others built reputations, he built redundancy. In 2024, a tech-savvy cartel faction attempts to redesign smuggling with automation, AI-coordinated drops, remote-monitored storage, and drone deliveries. It works, until it doesn't. One glitch, one overexposed server, one minor betrayal, and the whole structure crashes. Federal forces swoop in, dozens arrested, routes burned, reputation ruined. And while that faction is dismantled, a smaller, older cell moves 2 metric tons across state lines with paper manifests, manual ledgers, and drivers trained to say they're hauling poultry feed. Not one arrest, not one mention in the news. Guess which system was modeled off Azul's original transport logic? Many people still think that you can replace instinct with code, that the future belongs to automation. But Azul knew better. He built systems around people, not devices, around habits, not hope. Because people, real, loyal, cautious ones, can disappear. Servers leave trails, and he was never in the business of leaving trails. Historical fact: in 2023, one of the largest cash seizures in cartel history, over $200 million, came from a flashier cell that had grown too confident. But at the same time, multiple Azul-modeled routes had zero disruption and even showed minor increases in cargo volume. The analysis? Flash breeds failure. Quiet builds continuity. Somewhere in the hills outside Guadalajara, there's a facility listed as a data center. On paper, it stores agri-commodity metrics, but inside, the climate-controlled rooms contain rows of filing cabinets. No hard drives, just ledgers. All hand-logged, all current. The manager is a man in his late 50s, says little, knows a lot. Once, when asked why they don't digitize, he gestures at the walls and says, "Because these don't get hacked." Ask him where he learned that, he won't say. But there's a tiny blue mark drawn on the top drawer of every cabinet. Do you remember the analyst in Washington with the blue-covered file? He retires that year, leaves behind a note in his drawer. We never caught him, but we chased his shadow until we learned to respect the man casting it. That shadow stretches still. And while successors rise and fall in splashes of violence and media spectacle, Azul's influence now glides beneath the noise. You hear it in training sessions for mid-level cartel operatives. If you raise your voice, you lose the room. If your plans require luck, they're not plans. And if you leave a mess, someone quieter will clean it up and replace you. Those aren't lessons, they're warnings, passed down from people who once passed them up and paid the price. Even rivals have quietly co-opted his logic. A cell in Veracruz known for their ruthlessness recently shifted leadership. The new boss canceled executions, increased legal shell activity, and returned to fixed schedule shipments. His men grumble, but their profits are up, seizures down, and no one's had to sleep in a ditch for weeks. When asked what caused the change, the new boss said, "It's time to stop screaming. It's time to start surviving." Azul, whether named or not, is speaking through him. He's the quiet DNA now laced through every operation that chooses longevity over legend. He's the reason some ports still hum when others go dark. The reason an old truck with expired plates gets waved through while a convoy of armored SUVs gets pulled over and filmed. He's in the details. He always was. And he always knew that if the system was elegant enough, he wouldn't need to be present to be obeyed. That's the final shape of his power. Not being missed, being embedded. So as the news cycle spins and new kings fight for noisy crowns, somewhere a shipment rolls past the edge of the map. No fanfare, no escort, just motion. And beneath it all, the tick of the same watch, the same flow, the same ghost. There's a moment, right before the dawn touches the edge of the Sierra Madre, when the world seems paused. The roads still damp from night air, the birds not quite ready to speak. In that breathless hush, some say Azul would move, if he were still moving, because that's the kind of moment he always chose, the kind no one thinks to watch. But maybe he isn't moving anymore. Maybe he doesn't have to, because what he built doesn't need a hand on the wheel. It needs only time, patience, and people willing to respect quiet more than control. Even now, long after his alleged death, the rumors don't fade. They adapt. He's a beekeeper in Uruguay, a hotelier in Tangier, a private consultant for maritime insurance in Cyprus. None of them confirmed. All of them somehow believable. Because wherever things run cleanly, where people move without being noticed, where solutions arrive before problems, his shadow still fits the room. There's a woman now, an estate lawyer in Monterey, who finalizes transfers on behalf of an unknown trust. The recipients are always low profile. Former couriers, ex-logistics agents, sometimes the family of a man who once drove a truck during a bad storm and kept going without complaint. The funds are modest, but consistent. She never meets her client, just receives instructions by envelope, always bearing the same blue dot. One day, she asks the courier who delivers them, "Do you even know who this is from?" He shakes his head and says, "I just follow the schedule. It hasn't changed in 12 years. That's Azul, still organizing, still following a system he no longer needs to oversee. A man who outsourced his own legend. Many people still think that a man is measured by what he leaves behind. A name, a monument, a list of victories. But Azul left no speech, no memoir, no heirs with his eyes or scars. What he left behind was far more dangerous. A functioning world that no longer required his presence. Do you remember the port where nothing ever happens? Still running. The accountant in Sinaloa, still auditing. The church where the donation box receives blue-marked envelopes, still lit by a single flickering candle. Same time every week. In 2025, a law enforcement sting meant to cripple the last legacy routes ends in confusion. The target convoys never arrive. The warehouses are empty. The wiretaps silent. In one abandoned holding cell, a single piece of paper taped to the wall. A clean system leaves no residue. It becomes an inside joke among agents. But a few understand it's a message, a reminder. Because Azul's greatest act wasn't evasion. It was clarity. He proved that you don't need to be seen to be in control. You don't need to threaten to be obeyed. And you don't need to rule to shape the entire board. There's a vineyard now with a new vintage. It's sold anonymously, under the name Silencio Azul. It sells modestly. The label features no image, just a dot in the middle. No advertising, no press. But it always sells out. And those who drink it say the taste lingers longer than expected. Legacy isn't the noise we leave. It's the way people act when we're not there. And Azul? He isn't a memory, he's a method still in motion. And now, as our night reaches its final stretch, we let the hum of quiet settle around us. No more roots, no more risk, no more questions about where he might be now. Just the knowledge that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that don't ask to be remembered. You followed a man who never raised his voice, never courted legacy, and never needed a throne. And yet, he outlasted them all. Not by hiding, but by building something that could breathe without him. That's the real weight of silence. In a world chasing noise, he trusted the invisible. So as your room softens around you, fan turning, air thick with calm, let yourself rest like he did, knowing the job's already done. No alarms, no headlines, just systems ticking quietly beneath the surface. Maybe you too have a few moving parts in your life that don't need fixing, just understanding. Maybe you're carrying more than you need, or chasing louder things than necessary. But tonight, you're allowed to set them down, because even the strongest structures begin with stillness. So close your eyes, let the silence settle, and if somewhere in your dreams, you see a man walking without sound, nodding once, before fading into a pale blue mist, don't follow. He's already arrived where he's going. Good night, traveler.